All right. It looks like it's just about 6:30, so we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. To start, we're going to ask that participants just keep their cameras off with the idea that that will help us to maintain the focus on the panelists throughout the presentation. Yeah, I'm going to help some people with that here. All right. So welcome, everybody. We're excited that you took the opportunity to join us today. We realize that some people will be watching this presentation in its recorded view, but we certainly appreciate that you carved out some space in real time to have the opportunity to learn more about our October 6th bond referendum. Over the past couple months, we've had some really good conversations with community members around the projects of the bond referendum. We also put together some really good, high quality information and materials that we're really proud of. But tonight, we wanted to give the community members a chance to hear from the experts who have specific insights on the referendum. So you can certainly ask questions anytime throughout tonight's presentation, but we're also going to ask that you hold questions for sections when your question applies to the portion of the evening that's geared to that particular project or bucket of work. We're going to ask once again participants to keep their cameras off to maintain the focus on the panelists tonight. We invite you to submit questions through the email address vote@kenilworthschools.com. And those questions will be directed to the panelist who's best able to answer your question. So once again, so if possible, try to ask your question while the related topic is being discussed. We'll have some time at the end of the town hall for additional questions, but do know that if we don't get to your questions tonight, we'll follow up with an emailed response. And as I'm finding out through conversation with lots and lots of school stakeholders over the past couple of months, most questions can be answered through a careful review of our website. One particular page, especially our FAQ page, has some really great comprehensive information, and a lot of trending questions or answers to trending questions can be found there. We designed this town hall for your convenience, so you can log on or off at any point depending on what topics are of most interest to you. And we're recording the whole session, as I mentioned earlier, so it can be recorded or reviewed at any time. Tonight's town hall is just one of the ways community members can get all the information they need before voting on Thursday, October 6th. Some of you might already have visited our bond referendum website, about which I was previously speaking. And that website is kenilworthschools.com/leap. It's the hub for details on voting, projects, funding, and lots of frequently asked questions. The website also includes several videos, and that's where we'll add the recording of this session. Our district has been building momentum in achievement and innovation for several years. So everything from looking at professional learning and how to enhance that, to a real focus on STEM over the past years, to improving and reimagining what literacy instruction looks like for kids across K-12. And in those areas, we've made some really great advancements, thanks to our hardworking teachers, our supportive board, and our leadership team members. With an approved bond referendum, however, we'd be taking a bigger leap towards even greater improvements and really accelerating the efforts and achievements we've experienced over the last several years. So we'll hear more about the proposed projects from those who know our school buildings best over the course of the next 90 minutes or so. District architect Scott Mahalik and Roxanne Santangelo can explain what brought Kenilworth Public Schools to this point. And what they'll explain is really how the scope of work was winnowed from a much bigger scope to the scope of work that the bond referendum will focus on. We'll also talk a little bit about how those projects were prioritized and how they were part of a really thoughtful review of what the district needs in real time. Also, our longtime business administrator, Mr. Ganello, has a unique understanding of our facilities, and he'll talk a little bit about how our everyday facility work puzzles in with the big projects of the referendum. Yeah, so at this time, I'm happy to turn it over to Mr. Mahalik and Roxanne Santangelo.
Sure, thanks. I think on and unmuted. It's been a long time since I've said that, but I appreciate the time. But yes, you're absolutely correct. We had really started doing a pretty comprehensive assessment of the buildings going back now to about 2019, really looking at the critical needs, as well as how to, not only the buildings as buildings in and of themselves, but how best they serve what the administration, the leadership, and the teachers are trying to do within them. One of the big items that came across was the HVAC systems. We were in our meetings and discussions and reviews, we were looking at that before everyone else was looking at it when COVID hit, sometime into this process. And we've been fortunate that we have been able to address some of those things, including some chiller replacements and boilers, along with LED lighting conversions and things like that. All already completed or underway at no net cost to the taxpayers through several state incentive programs we were able to take advantage of. What's included in the referendum from an HVAC standpoint is replacing the actual physical units that are within each classroom that provide not only heating and ventilation, but air conditioning as well as what ties them together, the control system that links that all together and makes it really all work. It's all included in things that we would be looking at replacing as part of this referendum to really give the district, from an HVAC standpoint, between the work just completed and this new work, really get you to where probably you should be, if not in advance of other districts. From a building use standpoint, we kind of had a unique dual challenge. The first one, renovating Brearley so that there was a separation between the middle and high school. Right now, the entire building is a middle/high school, and there's a lot of intermixing going on. So there's how to separate that within one building, as well as adding 6th grade to bring them over from their current location at Harding. So those are two distinct yet very much related goals that we were challenged with. What we came to and how we accomplished this is by creating really a dedicated middle school entirely on the 2nd floor, the current Brearley middle/high school. This middle school will have its own entrance. It will have its own identity so that the middle school will physically look and be different than the high school. And potentially of most importance, there is no reason for any high school student to be up on the 2nd floor, because the 2nd floor will be entirely middle school 6th through 8 students. They'll have their own classrooms upstairs, their own art room, music, science rooms, technology, special ed, office, nurse, everything that they need is up on that 2nd floor for the middle school. There are a few shared spaces that it would obviously be redundant to try and duplicate. For example, the gymnasium, what we can do is utilize the current rear gym for dedicated middle school gym and cafeteria use. We separate that out, we renovate that space so that it's appropriate for both, and we can use that. Excuse me. The media center will remain on the 1st floor. However, there is a technology STEM room on the 2nd floor that will serve the middle school, so that acts almost as a satellite space. And then the auditorium, which again is not practical to have 2 different auditoria, so that would be a shared space. But for the majority of the school day, and for most of the ins and outs, middle school students will be upstairs on the 2nd floor. The high school currently has classrooms up there, but they also have science rooms. So those science rooms will be utilized by the middle school, and they are perfectly fine for middle school science. And in the new wing that would be constructed, we would include 4 additional new science labs that would be done based on what you're currently teaching today and not what you were teaching in 1960 or 70 when the school was originally built. So that's really how we solved that problem, is by adding a wing to allow us to have enough room on the 2nd floor for the entire middle school, as well as expand the high school offerings on the 1st floor.
In addition to the grade shifts and the HVAC work, at Brearley and at Harding, we'll be upgrading the 2 auditoriums with new finishes and auditorium seating, and also create a new rear entrance for events off the Brearley parking lot. This element was supposed to happen back when the gym was added in the mid-70s, but it never happened. So we're proposing to do that now. And then finally addressing the athletic fields, proposing a turf field at a turf field is becoming the norm for high schools, and this will ensure athletes to stay competitive. And in addition to that, we're also proposing regrading and addressing the ball field adjacent to that field.
So, and, you know, we've talked a lot, obviously, about what's going on in Brearley, and that certainly is the focus of the work. But what happens is not only do we then improve the high school experience and improve the middle school experience, but the domino effect, what that allows us to do at Harding is to free up the space currently occupied by 6th graders, just where the grades are within the building, and then that gets us additional space to expand the pre-K program with really not much work being needed to be done, because Harding at its heart is an primary elementary school. So that's really how all of these pieces fit in together, at least from an architectural standpoint.
Show some images. It looks like we're having maybe some technical difficulties with those images. So once we get them back up, maybe you guys can come back on for a few and talk through some of those images. So what you had just mentioned kind of aligns with some visuals.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Vince, but I wanted to see if you wanted to share a little bit more about the different funding sources and the ways in which we use our regular operating budget to support ongoing improvement and enhancements to our facilities across the district.
Yeah, sure, Kyle. We use the regular operating budget and capital reserve funds also to tackle smaller defined projects, such as the complete renovation of the Brearley Harding gyms that we did a couple summers ago, the facade repairs that were done at Harding, installing security vestibules, replacing the old rundown module building at Brearley with the new annex. And this summer we replaced the Harding stage in anticipation of the work to be done once the referendum is passed. And we just are finishing up the renovation of the TCM, or the Technical Media Center, and the esports room at Brearley, a project that we're really quite proud of. So all those projects were done without having to go to a referendum, without having to add additional tax burden on the community. As Scott mentioned, we leveraged state energy incentive programs. Through the utilization of these programs, we're able to install new chillers at both buildings, a new boiler at Harding School, and new LED lightings district-wide. So in addition to upgraded equipment, we reap the added benefit of the energy savings that we'd see from those enhancements. In addition, both Harding and Brearley recently had a solar array installed on their roofs, totaling 625 kilowatts. That project will save hundreds of thousands of dollars in electrical costs over the life of the project. I can't stress enough how much we need the renovations in the auditoriums. These are significant undertakings that we really can't take under control in the operating budget. Harding's auditorium is almost 100 years old. Parts of the auditorium are still original. Brearley's auditorium is nearly 60 years old, and it's really starting to show their age. So when we have the opportunity to do projects within the operating budget or use our capital reserve funds, we do so. We've even had some grant money over the past years that we've done some projects with. But the projects that we're talking about in the referendum are a little bit beyond the scope of that and our ability to do those projects. That's why we have to use the benefits of utilizing a referendum as well as receiving the debt service aid that we would receive in that particular case.
Yeah, one thing I've been mentioning too, Vince, is some community members have asked, well, why can't this work happen within the confines of the regular school budget over a longer period of time? And just the way budgets work and with caps, like that's not a reality for us.
Yes, it's not. We need to make these opportunities within the operating budget. It's almost impossible, especially with the restrictive budget caps that we have. So therefore, we need to prioritize our operating budget and focus. Most of the time goes on the educational, instructional needs. And if there are facility needs, we tend to lean those towards safety and security infrastructure needs, and not maybe something that's more aesthetic, such as the auditorium or the fields or something to that effect.
Right. We're monitoring questions in real time, and we're doing that through our email. So once again, I'll ask people to try to ask questions during the time their question or their topic is being discussed, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. Once again, if you email vote@kenilworthschools.com and we're not able to answer your question during the town hall, we'll certainly reply to you after tonight's session. But behind the scenes, we're seeing a couple questions for our architects about the project timeline. And in my sort of promotional informational roadshow about the referendum, that's been a trending question as well. Community members want to know when the construction would be completed and sort of what the project timelines look like. So Roxanne and Scott, maybe you could address that.
Sure, and that's a very that's a pretty common question that we see. When we're not even to the referendum. When's it going to be done? Because that's the excitement. That's when you get the benefits from it. The short answer is that the way that things look like they're panning out. We expect that you would be able to have your 6th grade move over, which is really the big keystone of this, for the September 2025 school year. That looks like the date that we can hit. What happens with school projects is that we don't do the full detailed design before the referendum, because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into that work. So that happens after the referendum is passed. And then there's a design timeline. There's a whole series of approvals, from state approvals and local approvals. The projects are then publicly bid, and then construction happens. We do a lot of work in schools. We understand the need to be as minimally disruptive, if not at all disruptive, while kids are in the building. We don't have the luxury of closing the building down for a year to be able to do this work. So we work around it. We do a lot of work in the summers. We make sure that the heavy renovations, the loud things, as much as we can get done in the summers, we do. So that would be the summer of 25, the summer of 24. And right now we're looking at the summer of 2023 with the pandemic and with lead times, and just as everybody's Amazons or things are getting delayed, as are mine, we're seeing a lot of delays in equipment and a lot of the building components that go into schools. So we don't want to promise that we'll get a lot of work done in the summer of 23, because HVAC equipment, for example, we're seeing months-long lead times where it used to be several weeks. So we expect the work to really start in earnest at that point. But really, the summer of 24 and the summer of 25 will be very busy summers at the campus. The addition part will be going throughout. That can't be done just in summers, but again, we have strategies and ways to minimize the disruption of that work to the main building. The nice part about it is that it is a wing on the building. We are not right up against the building. We are not invasive. We're not on top. So we can do a lot of the work while school is in session and not disturb the education that's going on.
Fact from fiction, right? So one area of seeming confusion at the community level is thinking that this is a new building, right? It's not. It's taking our existing structure within the existing footprint and adding onto it. It's not a separate school, although it will have a separate identity and separate spaces. It's on the physical campus of Brearley.
Correct. When there are two ways to define a school, there's a building and there's the operation. You'll have two schools, you'll have two, a middle school and a high school. They will together operate one building that will be designed in such a way that they function as two, but they're really still only one building.
Yeah, I just want to help to make that really clear. Thanks, guys. Yeah, hopefully everyone has a better understanding of how we could adapt the existing building to meet students' needs, particularly middle school students, by the end of this presentation. And speaking of middle school, we wanted to segue a little, or I want to segue a bit to take a deeper dive into the benefits of providing Kenilworth residents, Brearley students with a true middle school, right? So what are the affordances that middle schoolers will now have as part of having their own unique identity in this new Brearley Middle School? So I'm happy to introduce our principal, Jeremy Davies, and our middle school counselor, Meg Harrison, both of whom work closely with our middle school students and understand the real benefits that this enhancement to our schools will have on our middle school students. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everybody. So yeah, there's several benefits to this project, and I appreciate Scott's details of how a second floor will be entirely middle school. If you walk through our hallways at any given time during the school day, you'll see large high school students running into middle school students on the second floor as high school students head to science labs and middle school students head to all their other classes. We are in the hallways, unfortunately, having to shush seventh graders as they walk past math classrooms in the high school, just because everyone's kind of everywhere right now. And I think it's important that our middle school students have, and they really deserve, their own identity. And right now, that's just not quite the case. That's unfortunate for them because the middle school is such an important part of their growth and their development. We want our middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, to have an identity. And having that, second floor to themselves is key in that. Having the 6th graders there as well is key. When you think about a 6th grader, they're obviously so much closer in age and development to 7th and 8th graders than they are to the majority of the Harding population. Right, 4-year-olds are at Harding, and these kids are not at that age. So it's important that they're grouped with a middle school of 6th graders, and we're excited to have them come to Brearley. And also, when you think about most New Jersey schools, most New Jersey middle schools are a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And even New Jersey standards are bundled as 6th, 7th, and 8th grade bundles. So when I think about, preparing kids for high school and having 3 years to do that really makes more sense. And so, having all of our middle school together will also enhance our programs. We're able to offer more elective course offerings to our middle schoolers when we have a larger population with which to work. Right now, we're happy that we're opening up a dance program, which includes middle school. Our STEM program is very robust now, and we want to be able to improve upon that and grow those programs and build upon that for our middle school students so that they are having their uniquely middle school identity while also we're preparing them to be successful at the high school level.
Jeremy, so one thing that pandemic has really showed us, right, is that if students' social and emotional needs aren't met, they'll never reach their full academic potential. And so I think something we need to be thinking more deeply about is in what ways, as teachers and educators of middle school students, do we care for both? Right, so that is their academic needs, but also those really unique social emotional needs that pre-adolescents and young teenagers have. And so Meg, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how by having a distinct true middle school, we're able to tend to those sort of unique needs that I just mentioned.
Sure. So I know from the surface, it looks like middle school is just 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But it's so much more than that. It's really a critical time for our students. They're not only developing the type of student they are, but they're also developing their personality. And something that Jeremy had mentioned was having the 6th graders join us over at Brearley. But it's also separating, having our own space from the high schoolers. If any of you, and I'm sure we've all had at least one conversation with a middle school student, we know that where they're at in the way they look at situations and they deal with different types of incidences, it's very different from a sophomore or junior or senior. So allowing our students to have their own space, we can start to give them the skills and the tools and implement some cohesive and effective middle school appropriate programs, which I think is really important. I think we do a pretty good job for what we're working with right now, keeping them separate. But like what was mentioned earlier is we have at any given time, we have middle schoolers kind of intermingling with our high schoolers. And that can be really nerve-wracking when they come over to our building. It's a transitional period and it's a really important time. Like I mentioned, they're developing who they are and they're really molding what kind of student they're going to be moving forward. And they're developing what kind of person they're going to be. And that's really something that as a middle school counselor, I try to start off on day one when middle school students get to Brearley. We're really trying to foster a level of independence. But that just doesn't come with age. You really have to learn skills and tools on how to handle mature situations. And as a middle schooler, you don't always get it right the first time. And so I think with our own space, it will be, it's imperative that we have our own space because I think we're going to really be able to hit a lot of those social emotional needs that we just are unable to really fully explore right now. And I also think, with the pandemic, we're seeing maturity levels. They're different than what our normal middle schoolers that we've seen in the past. And, unfortunately, the pandemic, we're at the tail end of the pandemic, thankfully, but we're going to see the residuals of the pandemic for many years to come. So I think it's really important that we explore, what we can do for our students socially, emotionally, as well as academically, and our own space will really help us. It will really benefit our students.
Yeah, Meg, so can you talk a little bit more about that? I know some questions we've gotten is this seems like a lot of work for one grade level, right? Or they're just going to go downstairs anyway to high school. And so like, how do you disrupt that kind of thinking and really extol or spotlight some of those benefits that you just mentioned?
Sure. I think some of the conversations that I've had with people who live in town is that they have this idea that we already have our designated space because oftentimes, even when I'm giving tours, I walk people upstairs and I'll say, this is our official middle school. And though, we try to really embody a middle school upstairs, it really, you have high schoolers coming in upstairs to our science labs. And anytime I run any kind of character ed program, it's always a challenge. The building itself is a challenge. Having to navigate some of our programs, our spirit weeks and our social emotional different programs, it's hard to navigate around the high schoolers. I think sometimes our middle schoolers, I know our middle schoolers come over from Harding and they think they're in high school. They jump a whole, and like I said, it might just be 6th, 7th, 8th grade, but it is really, really critical time. So I think when they walk into the high school, the middle high school, they just automatically feel like they're in high school and they're skipping this really, really critical time to develop who they are as a person and a student. So with our own space, we could really utilize, our staff and the space to help our students mature and develop into age appropriately, right? We don't have students skipping, grades. We don't have students who think they're skipping grades, but really maturity wise, they're stunted still. So I think being able to have our own space will really help with that transition. And I think it'll allow us to support the middle schoolers to understand, what steps they have to take before they get to high school so they could be successful.
It's a good point, Meg, that I actually hadn't thought of before, which is something you said at the beginning of that response, which is where you alluded to, like you and your colleagues do a really good job of trying to make that space feel like a middle school. But essentially it's really not, right? It's still, there's just these blurred liminal spaces between the two buildings. And so it does make sense why maybe someone's confused and says, well, we do have a middle school. Well, we're trying really hard to have one, but this certainly gives us one with a unique identity, a footprint, and like hopefully a place of belonging for kids is what I'm hearing you say too.
Mm-hmm.
If I could also add on to that, Kyle, I don't want to underestimate too the effect of that blurred line on high school students as well, because what we find is that there's a very little transition from middle school to high school because you're just going to the same building. And having been mostly a high school person my career, there's something about going into high school for the first time, and our students don't have that. And we want to create that as well for them. So even even at Brearley, a high school identity is important. And I think, the majority of this referendum in terms of the Brearley aspect is to develop that high school persona, but also I think it's going to enhance the high school experience because there will be more of a transition into high school. Now you're entering high school as opposed to just going to a different room.
Looking at it from the other end of the grade level continuum too, right? As a result of middle school, what are the high schoolers, how do they benefit? Yeah, sorry, Meg. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I also, I don't often like to bring up things like bullying, but middle school is a time with increased incidence of bullying, and not just Kenilworth. This is across the country. So I think what people fail to realize is having a proactive approach to these types of situations, and it will really benefit our students social emotionally. And then, you had mentioned it earlier, Kyle, is we have to look at the whole student, right? We can't just look academically. If we have the best programs, the best curriculum, the best teachers, which I think we do, but you also have to look at a student as a whole student, and social emotional component really comes into play here. And so with our own space, we will really be able to reinforce independence, as well as really amp up our efforts to look at as a proactive approach to anti-bullying things, and just kind of making our students good people. And I think, even though it sounds kind of cliche at times, I think it really is important. I think when you say character education, you think of elementary students, but I think it's just as important, if not more important, as you get older, because you're starting to face really mature situations. And so students, when they face these situations, I want them to be able to feel comfortable, to talk to the staff members at the middle school, myself. And I think with, consistent language and having a really strong social, emotional, or character education program, it would really help our students just mature and grow into really wonderful, well-rounded students.
Yeah, it's really exciting to think and imagine and reimagine the possibilities for kids as part of this work. Yeah. Thanks, Meg. I appreciate your time. Jeremy, just building off of something you said about the benefits to high schoolers. There's a real strong STEM component to this referendum and its projects as well. And so in the last bunch of years, we've done a lot of work around trying to invigorate and really build our STEM program, from maker spaces to more design thinking and design challenges. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how STEM education matters right now and how this referendum supports STEM as a priority.
Sure. Yeah, STEM education matters because when we think about the jobs that our kids will eventually go off to, they might not have been invented yet, right? Those jobs, those careers. So we need to be forward thinking at all times and making sure that our kids are prepared in the way that they think about STEM. And so I think, right now, our middle school students don't really have access to STEM science labs. There's science classrooms. There are rooms that are designated science rooms, and they have some equipment in there, but they don't have labs. Room 209, if anyone's ever been in there, back to school night or whatnot. It's a bunch of tables that are science-y tables, but they're not the lab tables that we want for our students. So right now, the high school monopolizes all of the lab spaces because they're the high school and they need those labs for biology, chemistry, physics, environmental science. But our middle schoolers don't use those spaces. So it's really important to do that and to give them the ability to have labs lab tables, with lab equipment that they just don't have access to right now. So that's super important as we think about what jobs our kids want. And then just the creativity and the hands-onness of science itself. I mean, those are the jobs that are out there, and those are the jobs that we want our students to go after. And so the jobs that they want to go after.
Yeah, so right, there's a level of preparing students for the future, right? But right, for the here and now, what does STEM education in the 21st century look like? And as a result of these spaces, what kind of instructional mindsets and activities do you hope to see, and do you want to build as a result of now having these spaces?
Yeah, so we want them to be designing. We want them to be thinking about how to design things. And that requires, large spaces with big open opportunities to create, to build, to tinker, to toy with. And that's what we want our middle school students to have the ability to do. Yeah, that's what we're looking to how to enhance through this referendum.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate your time. I imagine there may be some questions for you later in the evening, so don't go too far. Yeah. We're going to switch gears from Brearley to talk about our younger students at Harding. When our architects, Scott and Roxanne, were speaking earlier, they spoke a little bit about the affordances and benefits that this referendum has on early childhood too. So by moving sixth graders to Brearley, we open up lots of possibilities at Harding School, particularly for preschoolers. So I'm happy to introduce two of my colleagues, Principal Bobnowski and one of our preschool teachers, pre-K teachers, Erin Healy, who can explain a little bit more about why these shifts that the referendum is proposing is so important for our youngest students. Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, this referendum is important because we always have a waiting list for our pre-K families. And we don't want to continue to have to turn away Kenilworth families for this very well-needed service. We currently offer pre-K at no cost to our families, but unfortunately, we can only service about half the number of pre-K students in the community. And we want to be sure that really all the families in Kenilworth have this service, and we want to expand on the service that we're currently providing. In the referendum, we're going to expand our pre-K playground area to make sure that our little ones have a separate place to play and to make connections with their friends and explore. While we're indoors, we want to expand on the current activities and programs that we offer to our pre-K families, and we're eager to do that. We're very lucky to have one of our veteran pre-K teachers here, Mrs. Erin Healy. And she is really the key person to give everyone a really good overview of what our current pre-K students experience and what maybe a future pre-K class would look like with the expansion of our program, offering it to more students.
Hi, everyone. Okay, yeah, so we definitely, hate that we have to have pre-K students on waiting lists. Currently, we can only service so many pre-K students, and it's a shame because we do see such a big difference when we have more students attending pre-K. Later on, they are much more acclimated with the building and have a lot more of those beginning readiness skills that they really need in order to move on through the grades. So much goes into their learning prior to just all those big academic skills. We just work so much on readiness skills in pre-K, which are just so important for kids. I like to say I really like to teach pre-K because I love to teach kids how to love school. And that is just so true. I find that if we can teach kids how to love school, then we can really teach them so many other things because they're already enjoying their time in school. It just makes me so happy when I talk to parents and they say that their kids just can't, they ask on the weekends, are we going to school today? And that is just a big part of my job. We want kids to be happy to come to school, take part in all the activities, make their first friends. And, just along the day, we have so many different parts of the day that are essential. We have our academic games and activities. as part of our Tools of the Mind curriculum. That's a curriculum we've been using now for 4 years. And during the day, aside from academic times, we also have plenty of time, which is so important for the make-believe play. But so much goes into that type of activity. It's not just play. They learn so many skills during that time. They can build social emotional skills. They are working on social skills, language skills, and so much more. We also have so much parts of the days that work on fine motor skills, the pre-writing and writing skills. And like I mentioned, social and emotional, which is so important, as Meg was mentioning before with the 6th graders. It's also important to work on that from the grounds up when the kids are young. So just, this expansion would be so big, such a big deal for us, because we would be able to offer our services to so many more children. We currently are maxed out our pre-K rooms right now as it is, and they're only in half-day programs, and it would just be so much better if more and more kids in Kenilworth could have a pre-K program. When you speak to kindergarten teachers, you see them saying they can tell the difference when kids have been through pre-K and the ones that are coming from outside programs or no program at all. It's just such a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, right? It's this idea that, yes, there's a strong academic component to preschool. We get that, right? It's through play. But the other piece is that when students go to pre-K, they're more available for learning when they come to kindergarten, right? They are better prepared. We don't expect them to come into kindergarten reading, right?
Exactly.
But they know how to self-regulate. They better understand how to control their emotions.
Yes.
They know the routines and procedures of school for a whole year. And so
Exactly.
that primes the pump for when they're 5 and in our classrooms, right? We want to take kids as possible, as early as possible, with our certified teachers, working with our curriculum, because we know how good our programs are, right? To provide students with those really high quality early childhood literacy and math experiences.
Exactly. Yeah. I really love the Tools of the Mind curriculum. As I said, we've been using it for 4 years, and there's so many components of it that are great. But one of my favorite parts is the self-regulation piece. And almost every game or activity works on those skills. And, just as some examples of those skills and why they're so important, without self-regulation, kids, they can't sit still, they don't know to raise their hands, or they know they're supposed to, but they impulsively don't, and they yell things out. They can't take turns. They might know the rules, but they forget them in the moment, and they just, do different things throughout the day. They might grab toys. They have a hard time with transitions. They, even at home, they won't be able to tolerate when it's bedtime. So things like that. But when they have self-regulation skills that we teach in pre-K through all of our games and activities in the curriculum, they can sit still. They can sit for longer periods of time as the year goes on. They can learn how to raise their hands, wait their turn. They can manage their emotions. They can use strategies during playtime. If someone has a toy that they want, they can start to use strategies. Okay, what can I do while I'm waiting for that toy? I'm not going to get angry. What can I do? Oh, I can play with something else. All of those skills they don't just come in with those skills. They have to learn them. And if they're just learning those when they enter kindergarten, it takes a really long time for those kindergarten teachers to really focus on academics, because they're just trying to get the kids to sit still and raise their hands and not grab, toys and everything. So it's very important.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's a question in here I see about play, right? And is that really educational time? And the answer to that is yes, right?
Yeah.
That's what education looks like when you're 3 and 4. It looks like learning through play, not only the type of play that teachers like yourself, Erin, teach into, right? But also play, and thinking about play in terms of what it can do for kids, right? How do they imagine their social world through play? How do they enact their agency as social actors through play? That's all part and parcel of what preschool is. That is like this very serious and intellectual work that kids do when they play, right?
Yes, exactly. so many people often say that about play and how much time is spent on play. And this curriculum just shows you how important it really is, and all of those skills. Kids just have so much more confidence when they're playing than when they're just learning, skills separately at a table. They are just more available for learning because, of course, when you're 3 and 4 and 5, you do want to play. And it's just so remarkable the difference that you'll see in kids when you involve a play aspect into everything. So for example, when we line up, we don't just line up. I'll say, oh, we're going to be Army soldiers, and what do Army soldiers do? And then when they're practicing doing that, they're now all of a sudden you have a nice straight line and quiet, and they're pretending to be something. So you're incorporating play in parts of the day. And so they're learning those readiness skills by playing, even when it's not actually playtime. We're doing play components.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Thanks, Ms. Healy. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
And hopefully if there's some other questions, you can jump back on.
Yeah,
But
certainly.
I wanted to shift gears a bit, Ron, to still stay within the site of Harding, but maybe talk a little bit about the auditorium. But as you do, or before you do rather, just a reminder that if you do have questions, our team is working behind the scenes to get those to me so that we can answer them in real time. And if we can't, we'll certainly get back to you via email. But maybe you could talk a bit about the auditorium, its age, what it
Absolutely.
needs,
So-
kind of vision for that space. Yeah.
As Mr. Ganella stated earlier, our auditorium is approaching 100 years old. And parts of it are original. And I will tell you, they don't make auditoriums like they used to, because for being 100 years old, it has held up fairly well. But it is certainly in need of a makeover, not just for looks and aesthetics, but just for practicality. One example is if I want to plan an assembly and see how many students I can house in the auditorium to watch a show or to watch some sort of assembly, I have to go in and count regularly how many functional seats I have in the auditorium, because on a weekly basis, I'm losing seats because they're just breaking down and they're not repairable. So it becomes costly, because if I can't seat the maximum number of students in the auditorium, then I have to pay for several shows in a day. And then it just gets too costly, and it's just out of our reach for a school budget. And then also we want a place where our students of the arts can come and really thrive in. We have a very large chorus. We have a very large band. We have actually 2 bands here at Harding. And we want our parents to come and sit in comfortable seats and enjoy all the hard work that their kids labor throughout the year to learn an instrument, to sing songs. And we even are going to bring our playback this year that has been on hiatus due to COVID for the last 2 years. So we're really looking forward to see all of those things put back into place at Harding. And just think of how much of a better experience it would be if our families can come and sit in a nice, pleasant place to watch their children.
Yeah, I think there's also something really important and special and magical about elementary kids gathering together as community, as a school level, right? As a school rather, as a grade level. And that can't happen right now because of the shape of the auditorium. Yeah, for sure. We appreciate your time, Mr. B. And hopefully if there's more questions, you can jump on to answer them. Yeah, thank you.
I'll be here.
Okay. We see some new questions here. We just want to address if we can, because it does speak to Harding's, the prong of work at Harding around the referendum. And so I'm hopeful that our principal architect, Scott Mahala, can help address this question, which is, why do we need an expansion on Harding? Yeah, so maybe Scott, you could talk a little bit more about the scope of preschool work, and Roxanne too. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, over at Harding, there is no physical expansion to the building footprint like there is at Brearley. Our work at Harding, in addition to the HVAC and the auditorium we talked about, is really limited to a few areas where we have toilet rooms within the classrooms that are not barrier-free accessible. In particular, there's one in the corner of the 1950s wing that is, I believe, the original 1950s bathroom, which is it's maybe 3 feet wide, maybe. So we would be actually expanding that into the footprint of the classroom. It is a larger classroom, so that we have a barrier-free toilet facility within that room itself. And the district has done that in the past in other areas and other rooms at Harding on a one-off basis. But that's really the limit of what we need to do at Harding. Harding is pretty well set up to accept the additional pre-K students.
Thanks, Scott. Roxanne, did you want to add anything to that?
The playground also that we are adding at Harding. And then there's also the auditorium upgrade to Harding, which we mentioned previously, and we just spoke, Ron just spoke about. And yes, that's.
Yeah, and I appreciate
much it.
the playground we're looking at putting in is on the side of the building where the pre-K would be. Currently, the main
Right.
playground is about 100 miles west. It's near the gym, it's near the cafeteria, but it's not really very close to where the pre-K center would be, which is on the other side of the building. So we would.
They pass my office and they spend more time walking there than probably playing on the structures. Yeah.
Right, so we would put a secondary playground in dedicated for the pre-KK population.
Yeah. Okay. While you guys are up though, maybe we can, I'll also ask Vince to hop on screen here. It might be a good time to segue to more of the outdoor projects. So some of the repairs to the stadium, the facilities, and why those projects need to be funded through the auspices of a referendum rather than a regular, school budget.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Arlington. Anyone who's walked the track knows why we need to replace the track. I think it's quite obvious why. That being said, overall, there are other repairs that need to be done to our athletic fields. And it can be tough to find opportunities to fund them within the operating budget. Especially, like I said earlier, we have a very restricted budget cap. So we have to prioritize that budget and focus on the many instructional needs that we have, as well as the safety and the security infrastructure before we could do something like replacing a track. But it's not a very cheap, inexpensive type of thing to do. It's a relatively expensive project. Therefore, we can't do it like within the operating budget. Like, for example, like we did the Harding School stage this year. We peeled off that from the referendum because it was doable within the operating budget. The track is very popular within the community. You'll see people using it all the time on the weekends, at nights. You have people walking all around our facilities. We know our athletes will put the track to good use. We had a girls track team last year won a championship. So that was a great accomplishment. Unfortunately, they weren't able to host any home track meets because of the disrepair of the track. So that's one of our goals, to be able to host some of our own track meets once again. Overall, our outdoor facilities get a lot of use. Lots of our neighboring communities have separate facilities for the recreational programs. We don't. Natural grass can take a beating, unlike synthetic turf. And that's why we want to try to do this project with the synthetic turf. Some of the reasons is the durability of the surface during the season. It holds up better to the elements, therefore utilization will increase. It's also from an actual operational and use perspective, it's very different from natural grass. So the way you run, the way a ball rolls, a soccer ball rolls, is different on natural turf than on synthetic turf. Because most of our competitors within our conference and our county have synthetic turf, our athletes are actually at a competitive disadvantage, not being able to practice on these synthetic surfaces. So they're practicing on the natural grass and then going to these venues where they're playing on the synthetic surfaces. And it's a very different experience for them.
will support, or debt service will support the turf, right? Because I think that's an important point, right? The fact that now that the state is supporting with debt service some of that work speaks to that it's not really a rarity anymore to have these types of facilities, right? It's almost part of doing business as a school district.
Yeah, actually, Scott, you want?
Sure, yeah, wasn't sure, but no, you're absolutely correct. We are getting some state aid on the exterior components where even just several years ago, there was really none to be had. The state was not financing any part of it. When you look at all of the exterior work that we're doing now, I'm not talking about what we need to do to put the addition wing in, but the turf field, but that also has a lot of drainage components with it. It's not just the carpet on top. So there's a whole very large underground drainage piece. The track that Mr. Ganell had spoken about, which is in need of some attention, as we shall say. There's areas, excuse me, of fencing around the stadium and all along 14th Street and sidewalks that are in pretty rough shape. That's all part of what we're looking at doing, modifying and regrading in natural grass, but the ball field between the stadium and Brearley, which are just not set up to properly safely support what your students are trying to use. So we're seeing about 2/3 of the stadium and field package of projects eligible for state aid. We weren't sure that we would get any of it, but the state again recognized the state of what we had here and is funding at that rate, which is not something, again, 10 years ago, if we were doing this, we would be getting zero, I would expect. And as Vince said, the turf is that is what's out there. That's what your competitor, the competing schools are using in the state. It's not the rarity anymore. It really isn't.
Anything else you guys want to add on the stadium projects? I see some questions about those that we'll address in a bit, but
Okay, sure.
anything else now?
Well,
Yeah, and okay.
Good, Scott.
No, I was just going to add on a little bit to what Vince had said with the playability of the turf field versus the natural grass. You have now, we haven't had rain much, but you have a couple of days of wet and you may lose your stadium for a week or more. Once it does come back to you, you have the challenge of having mud spots or dips or humps, and it just becomes a much more difficult surface to play on. You do have a lot more flexibility and a lot more the ability to use the turf a lot more frequently the day after it rains, or use it on back-to-back cycles.
And when you have towards the end of the season, when you're trying to get into state tournaments, you have to have certain eligibility. And if you miss 1 or 2 games because of rain, you might not make that window of competition. So it's very important to have a surface that is durable, that you could play on almost every day. So that's very important.
I think too, the turf and the track are getting spotlighted, but as Scott pointed out, there's other outdoor work that's really important that needs to get done, whether it's the sidewalks, the fencing, even some of the regrading, I guess, of the fields, right? Like that's significant work that needs to get done.
Yes.
This year alone, we put a Band-Aid on some of the field work by leveling it ourselves, but there needs to be more significant work done to address those field concerns, which the referendum encompasses.
Right.
Yeah. All right, thanks. I see some questions about funding, so hopefully we can kind of segue to that part of the conversation. I think it's really important for the public to know that the package that you're being voted on is part of was part of an ongoing, elongated conversation that lasted for several years, right? We did a full blown needs assessment of the district from soup to nuts, as they say, and the board narrowed down the original list of projects to what we feel is a financially responsible proposal. Our bond counsel, Tony Salamini, along with our municipal advisor, Danielle Marino, and Vince are here, and they could share a little bit more details about the funding strategy and the conversation around that strategy.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. Good evening, everyone. So as Vince indicated earlier in the presentation, the school district has really done a great job of utilizing its general fund budget and its funds that it's been able to save through capital reserve to address many of the facilities projects. But districts throughout the state, whenever you get a substantial amount of capital projects and you're trying to do additions and renovations of this nature, you really have to go out and borrow money to address those expenses and those capital improvements. And the way a school district is allowed to borrow money is through issuing municipal bonds through a voter-approved referendum. Unlike you or I, a school district cannot walk into a local bank to borrow money. They have to issue municipal bonds, and that's how you get a loan. So it makes a lot of sense from a public entity's perspective because they're spreading out the cost of those improvements over the useful life of the asset. So, they could pay for these, if they could pay for these improvements all within the next year or two, the residents that are living within Kenilworth's boundaries now would be paying for the whole cost of the improvements. Whereas by issuing debt over the useful life of those improvements, everyone that's going to be enjoying those assets will share in the cost over the next 20 or so years to pay for those projects. Additionally, when we first spoke and kind of strategized about, how to fund these improvements, currently the state of New Jersey only offers one opportunity to get any kind of financial assistance for facilities projects, and that's through debt service aid through the issuance of school bonds. So in order to get any money from the state for these projects, you have to have a voter-approved referendum and issue school bonds. Even if you could fund these projects on your own, you would get no state aid. So this is the only way for each one of us as taxpayers in New Jersey. We all pay into this pool of money that gets distributed throughout approved facilities projects throughout the state. So here's the opportunity for the residents of Kenilworth to actually recoup some of that money and bring some of that state aid back to your own school district and having the taxpayers contribute towards your facilities projects. So the state debt service aid, having all the individuals that are going to use the asset over the useful life of the asset pay for it. That's why a lot of school districts, whenever they're doing these capital projects, that's why they lean towards issuing municipal bonds.
It's muted, sorry. Vince, maybe you could speak a little bit to the actual breakdown of numbers and figures by way of like cost of total projects, state aid, capital reserve, et cetera.
Sure. So in our particular case, we were going to get around $5 million in state aid of the $31.4 million of the projects. The district is also applying an additional $2 million in our savings from the capital reserve to offset the costs of the project. So the capital reserve funds are actually deferring the local payments from starting until 2025.
So as Vince was saying, the school district does currently have some bonds outstanding. So the district is paying off those bonds. There would be an overlap between the new debt service and the old debt service that is coming off within about 5 years. The new debt we're expecting to pay over 25 years, and that's based off of the type of projects that the district wants to fund. That's going to cost about $359 annually on a home assessed at the borough average of $183,389, which is approximately $30 per month. And I just want to note that your home's assessed value is not the same thing as what you would sell on the market, and you can find your home's assessed value on the tax documents from the borough.
Thanks, Danielle. We have a really, really comprehensive FAQ page along with a page devoted to the financial aspects of these projects. Some of that information includes a pie chart so you can see the percentage breakdown of the different buckets of work, right? So the middle school additions and enhancements make up 52% of the total scope of work. You can learn more information like that by visiting our kenilworthschools.com/leap website. And I'm just reading a question right now. I'm trying to think if it was answered or not. I guess it couldn't hurt to make sure everyone's question is adequately addressed. But one question, Danielle, Tony, we're getting is, can you elaborate more on where the money is coming from? What requirements are needed to receive state aid? I think you just spoke about that a little bit, but maybe a little more detail.
I can handle. I mean, it's kind of, we did kind of just go over that, but basically what requirements? A referendum, a past referendum. So it's as simple as that. So we have a majority of the people who are in support of it and go out and vote for it. We have the referendum passed. That's how we get the debt service or state aid. Debt service is state aid, and we're using as a synonymous number. There are basically, in our particular case, we have three sources of funding. The majority of it is coming from bond proceeds. Then there's the debt service or state aid. And then finally, there's the capital reserve money that we're infusing for that first year and a half worth of payments to defer it until 2025. So I think that covers that question. Okay.
Question posed that's related about, Tony, the bond market. How can you be sure the costs won't rise if bond interest rates go up?
Sure. So that's a great question. And if you think about it, you guys have hired a financial advisor, Phoenix Advisors, to prepare a debt service analysis based on, reasonable projections of what the bond market will be at the time of the sale. So they are very cautious with their estimates, and they put some cushion in their estimates. So they don't use current market rates. They use current market rates plus some additional basis points to give you some cushion. The good news is, just like for the project, the dollar amount of the project that's voted on by the public, you're not allowed to spend $1 more on the projects. So I know that's a little different question, but I also think that's just very important to answer because, we have the size and scope of the project, and, many of us have probably done a home renovation project or such. A lot of times bids come in higher, cost comes in higher, in the original budget, we kind of throw out the window. With a public project, we're not allowed to do that. The Board of Education is not allowed to spend $1 more than was authorized by the voters. So if worse comes to worse and they bid the project and the project comes in over, they'd have to change the scope of the bid with alternatives. They're not allowed to legally spend $1 more. So as we put in cushion for the bond interest rates, when Scott, Roxanne, and their team designed the project, they put in contingencies and escalation factors in their projects. So hopefully when you go out and bid the project comes in lower than expectations as well. And then any of that excess money that's left over, that gets returned to the taxpayers in the form of tax relief. So, hopefully we've all, none of us have a crystal ball, but hopefully your financial professionals put in enough cushion and your design professionals put in enough cushion to kind of protect you not only on the design side, but also to protect you on the interest rate side. And then ultimately we were required to publicly bid the financing, and wherever the interest rates come in, the interest rates come in. But, there's also other avenues we could pursue if interest rates, other financing mechanisms, we can do short-term financing, we could divide the bond into several bond issues. So there's a couple different avenues we could explore, but, it's the financial advisor's job to put some cushion in to give you reasonable estimates and expectations.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. I appreciate your time, Danielle and Tony. Thanks, Vince. There are a few questions that are lingering that were asked throughout the evening, and we have about 20 minutes or so. So we'll try to get to as many as possible. And then we'll follow up in writing via email or post on our website. Any questions for which we didn't have time to answer this evening. For some of these questions, I'm going to ask for the panelists sort of to pop back up on screen if I can't, or if I feel their voice may contribute to the answer more robustly than mine alone. Yeah, so one question that's pretty simple to answer is, that was asked this evening, is what percentage of votes are needed for the referendum to pass? And so the answer to that is a simple majority. Do you want to add to that, Vince? But that's what's needed.
Need one more yes vote, then we have no vote. So yes, that's it, simple majority.
Yeah. Sometimes in the days of public school budgets, right, we know that these votes can be close sometimes. So while the school district can't compel people to vote yes, we can certainly remind them and encourage them to make an informed decision, learn all the facts, and vote as they wish, but really get out to the polls on Thursday, October 6th, to make sure their voice is heard and their vote counts. Thanks, Vince. Another question that was asked is, how will adding a STEM wing be more of an advantage than renovating the ones we already have? Maybe Jeremy and Scott can help support a potential answer to this question, which asks, why not just renovate what we have versus build anew?
Yeah, I mean, earlier I mentioned about how our middle school students don't have actual labs with working lab tables with, you know, the plumbing and the gas lines and those types of things. So that's an important component. And also, like, so we designed our media center to be a makerspace STEM lab. And I went in there the other day, and Mr. Springsteen was with his high school class, and they were designing maps of a video game. So they were doing video game design basically at the high school level. Well, that's not usable right now for middle school because the high school was there. Now it is a shared space, but it goes back to what Meg and I were saying earlier of, it's so hard to have this unique middle school with, you know, the shared space and having to jockey the schedule around it. So now middle school students can't get that elective because we can't schedule it when they need it, because the high school needs it at this time. So it becomes this issue of just a scheduling nightmare. Plus, on top of that, you know, we will be renovating those science labs for the middle school. So it is happening in that way. Like, we will be renovating those labs so that the middle school has those labs that the high schoolers are currently in.
Yeah, I think the other thing to consider too is that the current labs are all upstairs on the second floor, which will become the middle school. So those, again, are pretty well equipped for the most part for middle school education. For the high school labs, we have two choices. We have existing rooms that we can try and retrofit for new use as a science or a STEM lab, or we have the new construction component in the new wing that will be coming off of the side. When we're building new, it is much easier to get the utilities where we need them. When you think about science and STEM education, it's not a typical classroom with an outlet in the front and an outlet in the back. You're looking at usually a little bit increased electric. Sometimes there's gas, there's waste lines and water that you want to bring into the room. And that is a lot easier and honestly a lot more cost effective to run those where we want them and where we need them when we're building new. We certainly could renovate existing spaces, but then we're on the ground floor. We have to chop up the slab to run lines and make Swiss cheese of the floor. It's very loud, that's messy, that's dirty, and it's expensive. And anytime we're renovating an old building, we know that there can be surprises. So by taking advantage of the fact that we do have a new construction component anyway, locating all that utility work in that new wing We're actually making an easier construction process. And we can design the rooms really to what they need to be and not trying to fit in the confines of maybe a 750 square foot room that exists already.
Yeah, Scott, I feel like a good deal of our work, right, of the referendum falls into two buckets. The first is long overdue repairs, the auditoriums, the track, some of the HVAC work, which we didn't talk about. And then the other bucket is filled with like innovation and vision and us wanting to stop catching up and start leading the pack. So like that therein, I think, is the frame to think about the science labs. So maybe you could talk a little bit about like what you're seeing in other districts with labs and the type of STEM spaces that you're supporting other districts in building.
Sure.
Yeah.
Two really big components that we're seeing are flexibility and technology. Those are, with all due respect, two things that you don't have in your physical science labs right now. Flexibility, to be able to, you may have a lesson one day where you need the entire floor open and you're using the full floor, 1,200 square feet to, run experiments, run tests, do different things. The following week, you may need the tabletops. You may need things pushed together. So the ability to really outfit these spaces flexibly, as well as to even look at technology and electricity flexibly. Years ago, science labs, you may have had electric outlets along the wall so that you have your students at stations, each running experiments. Well, now you may need overhead cords coming down so that you have power exactly where you need it within the lab and not just at that dedicated space. And the infusion of technology, we are seeing more and more, I think in that science concept one there, you see there's overhead monitors. We've worked with districts that actually have multiple monitors and multiple data entry points within the lab so that you're not just doing a hands-on experiment with, Bunsen burners or whatnot. You're doing things and then logging them in right there at the station into a networked environment that the teacher can oversee, that you can share with other stations throughout the room. So, we're not educators. We put in what's needed to support what you're doing from an educational standpoint, but that's really the way we see things have been going. It's really not that static lab situation that was, even 20 years ago, the typical of what was going in. It's really all about the flexibility and about bringing that technology in, because that's how these kids are going to use it in college and in the real world.
Yeah. In what ways are our schools generally still preparing, Jeremy, kids for jobs that won't exist by the time, right, they're in the workforce? I think that's something we need to constantly be thinking about as educators, right? Not like what skills will they need, because those jobs haven't even been created yet, but thinking about what skills do we continue to produce and reproduce that won't be needed at all, because those fields might not exist because of the rapidly changing nature of technology.
Yeah, to your point about leading and not just catching up. We need to be thinking about that and envisioning where our students will be when they're at college and beyond.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you jumping back on here. A couple more questions that seem to have come in the last few minutes. Do the renovations take into consideration supporting an influx of new students and more housing if more housing is built in Kenilworth? So we know that Harding School is cramped for space, and that by moving sixth graders to Brearley, we open up that space, and that space provides kids with lots and lots of academic and extracurricular opportunities, as we shared throughout the evening. But I feel like Scott could answer this better, because I probably can't say it right. But you can't petition the state for space or debt service aid for kids that you think may be coming. They actually have to be here right now. So we're always hearing about the possibility of construction and new housing in town. And so while opening up these spaces helps us prepare for that if that becomes a reality. Again, you can probably say this better than I can. We can't ask for relief from the state for kids that are hypothetical, right?
Yeah, that's, you said it very well, actually, but yeah, you're correct. The state won't allow you to overbill. They want to be a little bit of the watchdog to make sure that a school district doesn't try and overbill. One of the things, looking back to 2019, when we were just looking at some of these processes, this came up, and there are ways to expand both buildings if needed to accommodate more students. But again, when we have so many needs, both from an infrastructure and an educational standpoint, to try and project out the what maybes or the what ifs started to seem to be really fiscally not feasible. So we know that the buildings can accommodate more students through expansions in the future if it is needed. But for right now, for the information that we have in front of us in terms of what's been approved by the town and plans that we know of, what we're putting in will hold us. You know,
And Kyle, I think if I could add something to that, I think whenever you're looked at, I mean, I've seen some, you know, possibility of some housing, and even if it does happen, you're not talking about large numbers, even if you're over in a specific grade level. I think that's where you have the concern when you're talking about the capacity of a school and being able to function. So for example, even if we were to say this 300 units brings in 75 kids, that's not going to be all in one grade or one grade level. So we have the ability within our current class sizes to add kids to certain grade levels without actually having very significant impact to our programs. And so I think that's very important, that you're not talking about adding starting a kindergarten class and bringing in 100 kindergartners. It's not like we're going to be creating 4 new classrooms. So I think that has to be put into context as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it ties back to what I said earlier about part of this work being catch up, but part of it moving us forward. And I think another binary to think about is being reactive versus proactive, right? So we're being reactive because we have to be with some of the upgrades, auditoriums, not because we didn't know this was happening, but because, as you said earlier, Vince, curriculum and instruction and academics always are foregrounded as they should be. But some of this other work is proactive work, right? Trying to make sure our kids have the skills and dispositions that they need and the learning environments to support those skills and dispositions in the 21st century, right? So some of this is about big vision work, and some of it is about like needed repairs. Most people don't have a kitchen in their house that's 100 years old, right? It's about a balance of those two things.
Yeah, and we haven't really talked about a very big piece of this, which is the HVAC, which is the very, very practical side of this project.
Yeah, do you want to give like a high level, a couple notes on that, Vince?
Yeah, I mean, our systems are, you know, it's not like our systems are horrible. It's just that they're starting to get to a point where they're becoming very expensive to maintain. So the HVAC systems, and a lot of the work we've been doing through the ESIP project. So we replaced the 2 chillers, we replaced a boiler through the ESIP project. But the classroom unit ventilators, which are those units in the classroom that provide that fresh outside air, they're starting to get aged. They're getting close to 20 plus years old. It's hard to find parts for these type of units. They're not the old mechanical units. They're highly electronic, highly computerized. And as such, you know, when they start going, it's hard to get those parts to maintain them. So we're looking at, you know, over the next 5 to 10 years, if we don't do something very drastic, we're not going to have a system that's operational. So that's why this piece is important. And we all know COVID really put to the forefront how important maintaining a good, healthy classroom environment is. And we were fortunate that we were able to come back from COVID, get our kids back on a daily basis in these classrooms because we had a operational HVAC system. This is once again being proactive to ensure that in the next 25 years that system stays operational.
Right. Thank you, guys. There's probably time for maybe 1 or 2 questions that I see here, and then I'll look to wrap it up. One of them is, how many teachers will be added as a result of these projects and in what subject areas? So if we do make good on our promise to expand preschool, because we want kids, as I said earlier, to be here as early as possible with our certified teachers working through our curriculum, we would look to most likely expand our preschool teaching staff by 1 person. But we believe that through careful scheduling and sharing personnel in thoughtful ways, that we would have the staff to accommodate the expansion to Brearley, right? Moving 6th graders over to Brearley doesn't mean we need a whole new cache of 6th grade teachers. We have 6th grade teachers already. And same thing with specials, nursing staff, et cetera. We believe we can build a true unique middle school with the existing staff that we have currently. Another question that is probably a good one to end with, because it is certainly one I've heard many times. Mostly I've heard this one from parents, to be honest. Many community members have expressed support of the referendum, but also said, what's in it for residents who don't have children in the district? And in response to that query, I usually give the stock response that the quality of a school district is important for the whole community, particularly in a small community. The school is the community, and the community is the school. Moreover, school improvements, as you likely know, are linked to increased property values and usually facilitate the ease of selling a home. If you've checked out our website, we have some statistics up there in which we identify, right, most people, or the majority of people, choose a town in which to reside because of the school district. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're making such great strides in so many different areas of school. And these enhancements to our buildings and grounds, these enhancements to our facilities accelerate that enhancement in a really exciting and visionary way. Most homeowners, right, with kids say schools are a top factor in where they choose to seek to buy a home. So the stronger the school district, the stronger the community. And essentially we share our resources with the community, right? We share our fields, we share our buildings. We have this symbiotic relationship with the community, and the referendum and its work just supports that strong relationship. And I know that's something I'm really excited about, and I think a lot of others are too. I know there are a few more questions, but with an eye on time, I want to be respectful to the panelists and to you for carving out some time to join us for this really important conversation. So we'll wrap up our session here. As I've said repeatedly, but it probably is worth repeating again, if we didn't get to your question tonight, we'll follow up by email. Look for this town hall to be shared this week on the website, kenilworthschools.com/leap. I'd like to thank all our panelists for sharing their expertise tonight. This conversation really charges me up because I know it will provide our students with access and opportunities, some of which they've never had before. I'm an educator because I believe all kids deserve that access and those experiences. And I'm in Kenilworth because I believe Kenilworth kids deserve that access and those experiences. Thanks to the community members for taking the time to learn more about this referendum. I hope that you vote after learning all the information and making an informed decision on October 6th. That's a Thursday. That's a little unusual for an election, but it is a special election, which is why it's being held on a Thursday. In-person voting will be available at Brewerly Middle High School from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we'll send out lots of reminders to make sure that you do your due diligence in voting. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and your support of our school district. Thanks again. Have a good night.